One waitress, one arrogant millionaire, and a grand piano. What started as a cruel attempt to humiliate her turned into a moment that silenced the room and shattered egos. You won't believe how she turned the tables with nothing but her talent. It was a warm Friday evening, and the hum of conversations filled the air at La Fontaine, an upscale restaurant tucked into the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina. The clinking of glasses, soft footsteps of servers, and the faint strains of jazz from a corner piano created an ambience of refined indulgence. Deborah, a 25-year-old waitress with a quiet demeanor and an unmistakable spark in her eyes, moved swiftly between tables, balancing plates and smiles. To most patrons, she was just another face in uniform, but inside, she carried dreams bigger than the luxurious dining room around her. Deborah's passion wasn't serving tables, it was music. Ever since she was a child, the piano had been her refuge, a place where she could express every joy, every sorrow, and every unspoken thought. But dreams don't pay the bills. Working long shifts at La Fontaine was a necessity, a stepping stone toward the music academy she longed to attend. Few knew about her talent, except for the restaurant staff, who occasionally caught her stealing moments at the old upright piano in the back room during breaks. That night, as the evening rush began to settle, the door swung open, and in walked Leonard Grayson. Instantly recognizable, the wealthy entrepreneur made an entrance like he owned the room. Flanked by a few equally polished companions, Leonard exuded an air of superiority. Known for his sharp tongue and penchant for spectacle, his presence made even the most seasoned staff stand straighter. Deborah's colleagues exchanged knowing glances. Leonard was not an easy guest. He was the kind who thrived on pushing people's buttons. For Deborah, though, he was just another table to manage in a long night's work. But this wasn't going to be a normal evening. As Leonard scanned the room, his gaze landed on Deborah. Something about her seemed to catch his attention, a momentary pause, then a smirk. Deborah felt the weight of his stare, but brushed it off, focusing instead on refilling water glasses and clearing plates. But Leonard wasn't done with her. He'd already decided she was going to be his entertainment for the night. Deborah had grown up in a small town in South Carolina, where dreams of grandeur often felt as distant as the stars. Her mother, a single parent and a tireless caregiver, had worked double shifts as a nurse to ensure Deborah and her siblings had food on the table. Despite their modest means, music had always been a constant in their home. Her mother's old vinyl records and the out-of-tune piano gifted by a neighbor were the seeds of Deborah's love for melody. That piano became her escape. While other kids played outside, Deborah spent hours teaching herself to play. She mimicked the songs on the radio, then ventured into classical pieces she found in second-hand music books. Her talent didn't go unnoticed. She played at church, school recitals, and community events. But recognition couldn't mask the financial hurdles that loomed over her dreams. By the time she turned 18, the reality was clear: a professional music career would have to wait. Scholarships didn't come through, and family responsibilities took precedence. Deborah packed away her concert ambitions, replacing them with the practicality of earning a living. Yet she couldn't entirely give up. The piano was more than a dream, it was her identity. When she moved to Raleigh a few years ago, Deborah sought out a job at La Fontaine, not just because of the pay, but because of the grand piano tucked into the corner of the restaurant. Even though she rarely had time to play it, just knowing it was there gave her a sense of comfort. Music hadn't left her. It was simply waiting. That night, as Leonard and his entourage took their seats, Deborah approached their table, balancing a tray with practiced grace. Leonard ordered a top-shelf scotch and cracked a joke loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Deborah offered a polite smile as she took their orders, her voice steady, despite the strange energy radiating from him. "Deborah, huh?" Leonard said, glancing at her name tag. Sounds like someone with a lot of hidden talents. The comment caught her off guard, but she nodded politely and stepped away to place their orders. She didn't notice the knowing grin he shared with his companions, nor the way his eyes followed her every move. But Leonard wasn't just observing, he was planning. And Deborah would soon find herself at the center of a spectacle she never asked for. The night carried on like any other, with the hum of laughter and silverware filling the room. Deborah kept her pace steady, avoiding Leonard's gaze as she moved between tables. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but something about him felt different, not just rude, but calculated. His presence loomed like a shadow, making her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite shake. By the time the appetizers were served, Leonard had already started his performance, though not the kind Deborah expected. He held court at his table, loudly recounting tales of his success and peppering in jabs about people who lacked ambition. His entourage laughed dutifully, while other diners shot annoyed glances in his direction. Deborah tried to stay focused on her tasks, but as she returned to his table with a bottle of wine, Leonard caught her off guard. "Tell me, Deborah," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "What do you do when you're not carrying plates? Surely, a young woman like you has dreams." His words stopped her mid-step. Deborah hesitated, then gave a careful answer. "I play piano sometimes," she said softly, hoping to keep it brief. Leonard's eyes lit up, and a slow smile curled across his lips. "A pianist, huh? How fascinating. Why don't you give us a little performance?" Deborah froze. The room seemed to quiet, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "Oh, I couldn't," she said quickly, forcing a nervous laugh. "I'm just here to work tonight." But Leonard wasn't about to let it go. "Nonsense," he declared, his voice booming. "There's a piano right there in the corner. Show us what you've got. Surely a future star like you isn't afraid of a little audience." His companions chuckled, clearly enjoying the show. Other diners turned their heads, curious about the commotion. Deborah's chest tightened. She could feel the heat of their stares, the silent judgment waiting to unfold. She wanted to say no, to walk away. But Leonard's challenge hung in the air, daring her to rise to it or crumble under its weight. "I really shouldn't," Deborah stammered, glancing around for support. But even her colleagues seemed hesitant to intervene. Leonard leaned back in his chair, sipping his scotch with a smirk. "Ah, I see," he said mockingly. "All talk, no talent. That's disappointing." The words hit like a slap. Deborah's hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't one to seek confrontation, but the way he dismissed her, like she was a joke, a nobody, cut deeper than she expected. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Never let anyone make you small, Deborah. You're bigger than they'll ever know." A moment of silence stretched between them. Deborah glanced at the piano, then back at Leonard. His smug expression dared her to take the bait. And against her better judgment, she did. "Fine," she said, her voice steady but low. "I'll play." As Deborah walked toward the grand piano, the dining room's chatter slowly faded. Each step felt heavier than the last, her pulse pounding in her ears. She could feel the weight of Leonard's smug gaze on her back, his challenge echoing in her mind. She slid onto the bench, her hands hovering over the polished keys. The room was expectant, a mixture of curiosity and quiet amusement lingering in the air. She could hear someone whispering at a nearby table, another diner, chuckling under their breath. They didn't expect much from her. Deborah closed her eyes. She had a choice: play timidly and prove Leonard right, or let the music speak louder than any insult ever could. She chose the latter. Her fingers touched the keys, hesitantly at first, feeling their cool surface beneath her fingertips. A single note rang out, then another. She played softly, the melody drifting through the air like a whisper. It was a piece she had learned as a child, one she played when the world outside felt too loud, Clair de Lune. As the notes wove together, something shifted. The air changed. The murmurs quieted. Deborah's hesitation melted away as the music took hold. Her fingers danced over the keys with increasing confidence, each note carrying a piece of her soul. She wasn't just playing, she was telling a story. A story of struggle, of longing, of dreams that had been buried but never truly forgotten. She played not for Leonard, not for the wealthy diners who had looked down on her, but for herself. For every late night spent practicing in a cramped apartment, for every moment she thought about giving up but didn't. The melody swelled, filling every corner of the restaurant. The same diners who had smirked now sat in stunned silence, their meals forgotten. Even the waitstaff, who had seen Deborah day in and day out, stood frozen, watching in awe. And then, something unexpected happened. Leonard, the man who had set this up as a cruel joke, leaned forward. The arrogance in his eyes flickered, his smirk replaced by something else. Something unreadable. As Deborah reached the crescendo, she lost herself in the music completely. The weight of the restaurant, the weight of Leonard's presence, everything fell away, there was only the piano and the sound of her own heartbeat. And then, silence. The last note rang out, lingering in the air, like a breath held too long. Deborah's fingers stilled, resting on the keys. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, applause. Loud, thunderous, unapologetic applause erupted around the room. Some patrons even rose from their seats, clapping, cheering, whistling. The once dismissive glances had transformed into admiration, into respect. Deborah sat frozen, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She had expected polite claps, maybe a few half-hearted nods. Not this. She turned slightly, her gaze landing on Leonard. His expression had changed. He was still seated, his fingers interlocked in front of him, eyes fixed on her. The smirk he had worn so confidently before? Gone. He looked, caught. Trapped between pride and something deeper, humility, perhaps? Then, almost begrudgingly, he lifted his hands and clapped. Slowly at first, but deliberately. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't even respect. It was acknowledgement. As the applause died down, Deborah rose from the piano bench, smoothing her apron. She turned to face Leonard, her heart still pounding. "Well," he said, his voice forced into its usual confident drawl. "That was unexpected." A chuckle rippled through the crowd. Someone at a nearby table muttered, "Serves him right." Leonard's eyes flickered toward the source of the comment, but he ignored it. He turned back to Deborah, lifting his glass. "Talent really does come from the most surprising places." His words, meant as some kind of half-hearted compliment, fell flat. Deborah didn't smile. She didn't thank him. Instead, she met his gaze and said, "Everyone has a gift. It's how you choose to use it that matters." The air shifted again, this time in Deborah's favor. Leonard's jaw tightened slightly, his fingers curling around his glass. For the first time since entering the restaurant, he had no witty comeback. Deborah didn't wait for one. She turned, walking back to the waitstaff station, her head held higher than ever before. And just like that, she had reclaimed her night. As the evening continued, something unexpected happened, diners began stopping Deborah to talk. "That was incredible," an older woman said as Deborah refilled her water glass. "I don't think I've ever heard anything so moving." "You have a real gift," a younger couple added. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her coworkers, too, looked at her differently. Not just as a waitress, but as something more. As she made her way back to Leonard's table with the check, he looked up at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "You made your point," he muttered, signing the bill. "No need to rub it in." Deborah tilted her head slightly, studying him. Then she said, "It was never about proving anything to you. I just wanted to play." For a moment, Leonard said nothing. Then, with a small nod, he set down his pen. "Fair enough," he admitted. That night, Leonard left without his usual bravado. His entourage followed, quieter than before. The arrogant swagger in his step had dulled slightly, his presence no longer casting the same overbearing shadow. But for Deborah, the night was far from over. 2 days later, something even more unexpected happened. The restaurant manager pulled her aside. "Deborah," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "A guest from that night, one of the diners, asked for your contact information." Deborah frowned. "What for?" "He's a music producer," the manager said. "From Nashville." Her breath caught in her throat. "He said he'd like to talk to you," the manager continued. "Maybe even set up a demo." Deborah felt the weight of the words settle in her chest. A demo. A door. A chance. She swallowed hard. "Did he say when?" "Tomorrow," the manager said. "He's still in town." Deborah nodded slowly. She had spent years dreaming of a moment like this. And now? It was here. That night, Deborah sat at the old upright piano in her tiny apartment, running her fingers over the worn keys. The sound wasn't as crisp as the grand piano at La Fontaine, but it didn't matter. The music was still inside her. As she played, she thought about everything, the years of self-doubt, the nights spent wondering if she was wasting her time, the weight of a dream that had seemed too big to chase. And now? She was one step closer. The moment at La Fontaine wasn't just about proving Leonard wrong. It was about proving to herself that she had never needed anyone's validation to be great. She had always been enough. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. What about you? What dream have you been holding back on because of fear or doubt? Don't wait for someone like Leonard to test you. Take your step forward now. If Deborah's story inspired you, subscribe for more stories of resilience and triumph.